In a world where reality and illusion blur, Rohan's seemingly perfect life begins to unravel when the line between what's real and imagined becomes dangerously thin. Tonight, we embark on a journey through fractured realities and elusive memories. A tale where a man's longing for a life he can no longer touch blurs the boundaries between dream and waking. Welcome to Echoing Tales, where every step leads deeper into the unknown. Tonight's story is titled Hiraeth, a longing for home. The morning sun bathed the valley in hues of gold and orange, filtering through the large windows of Rohan's bedroom. A sprawling house rested peacefully between the hills, its red brick walls draped in vibrant bougainvillea, spilling over like nature's tapestry. Tucked away in a quiet corner of Shimla, the house overlooked a pristine river, its gentle flow mirroring the lush green landscape that surrounded it. His children, Araf and Anya, laughed as they chased each other outside, their voices full of life. Every morning began the same way for him. Perfection. Priyal, his wife, stepped quietly into the room, holding two small boxes. One for him, one for her. "Good morning, Rohan," she smiled, her eyes warm and familiar. It had become a daily ritual. Priyal handed him the box of red pills, a routine so ingrained that neither of them questioned it. They simply swallowed a pill each and went on with their day. This morning, however, as Rohan opened his box, his fingers brushed the bottom. Only a few pills remained. His heart skipped a beat, a strange unease filling his chest. But when Priyal asked if everything was all right, he just smiled, brushing the feeling away. "Just a little tired," he murmured. Rohan was a painter, and his studio was a sanctuary. An open space with floor-to-ceiling glass windows that overlooked the mountains and the river. The light danced on the easel as he prepared for his next session. Every day, clients came to have their portraits painted, marveling at his talent. His paintings were known for capturing not just the likeness, but the soul of his subjects. The soft chime of the doorbell broke the silence. As Mr. Diwan, an elderly man with a sprightly step and a warm, kind smile, entered. His silver hair gleamed in the sunlight as he beamed at Rohan. "Ah, Rohan, I've heard so much about you. My kids kept saying, 'Dad, you have to get your portrait done by this young man. He will paint you just as you are, full of life.'" Mr. Diwan chuckled, settling into a chair. Rohan smiled, setting up his easel as the old man continued. "I've got a big family, 3 children and 5 grandkids. They are my world, really. Every weekend my house is bursting with laughter. It is such a joy having so many loved ones around. They keep me young." Mr. Diwan's eyes sparkled as he spoke, his voice full of warmth and pride. As they talked, Mr. Diwan's gaze drifted to a painting on the wall, a portrait of a woman with vibrant eyes and a radiant smile. "And who might this be?" he asked, pointing at the artwork. "She looks so full of life. Those eyes, they're sparkling with happiness." Rohan's expression softened as he looked at the painting. "That's Ria. She was my last client before you. She had such an infectious energy about her, always smiling, always cheerful. She was one of those people who lit up a room just by walking into it. And she wanted to be painted just like that, I imagine," Mr. Diwan said with a grin. "Yes," Rohan nodded. "She was clear about it too. Paint me as I am, happy." And honestly, that's exactly who she was. Full of enthusiasm, so alive, so full of joy. It was refreshing, really. Mr. Diwan leaned back, satisfied. That's how it should be, Rohan. You've got to capture people in their truest, happiest state. Life's too short for anything else. Rohan smiled, feeling the warmth of the moment. As he started painting Mr. Diwan, he couldn't help but notice how the man's demeanor matched his words. Joyful, content, surrounded by the love of his family. A few days later, as Rohan reached for the pillbox on his bedside table, an unsettling tightness gripped his chest. His hand hesitated before lifting the lid. For days he had avoided thinking about it, hoping against hope that there were more pills than his mind had feared. But when he finally opened the box, his worst fears were confirmed. Only one red pill remained. It lay there, solitary, in the corner of the box, staring back at him like a tiny, ominous reminder that something inevitable was approaching. His heart pounded in his chest as he picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly. Priyal was in the kitchen, busy with the children, and he didn't say a word. His mind raced with silent questions, but no answers came. How long had they been running low? What would happen after this final pill? He swallowed the pill, but it felt different this time. He could feel it sliding down his throat like a weight settling uneasily in his stomach. The familiar routine now filled him with dread, and a deep, hollow ache seemed to take its place. He exhaled slowly, trying to push the rising fear aside. That day, the world around him felt strangely heightened. The light through the glass windows of his studio was brighter than usual, casting vivid colors across the walls. The laughter of his children outside echoed more sharply, as if trying to imprint itself on his memory. He lingered with them longer than usual, watching them run through the garden, their voices filling the air like music. By evening, Rohan's unease had grown unbearable. The sight of Priyal singing their favorite lullaby to the children before bed made his chest tighten with emotion. Her song filled the house with warmth and comfort. Yet to Rohan, it now carried a bittersweet note, as if it were the last time he'd hear it. He stood in the doorway, watching her, and a thought crept into his mind. How lucky I am! How long will this last? Later that night, Rohan and Priyal strolled through the moonlit garden hand in hand. The soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine, but Rohan couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Stopping by their children's favorite tree, he looked at her, emotion heavy in his voice. I'm so lucky to have you and the kids. I never want to lose any of this. Priyal smiled, squeezing his hand. You won't. I love you, Rohan. And if you ever feel lost, come find me. You will know where. Her words, though tender, left an unsettling feeling in his chest. The next morning, everything changed. Rohan opened his eyes to a harsh, sterile light above him. The sounds of machines beeping filled the air. He wasn't in his home. He was in a hospital. Disoriented, he tried to sit up, but his body felt foreign, weak. Nurse, the patient is awake, someone called out. A nurse hurried into the room, followed by a doctor who began checking his vitals. You have been in a coma for 8 months, the doctor explained gently. You suffered a heart attack. His name wasn't Rohan. He was Aditya Kapoor, a wealthy businessman whose face had graced magazine covers. His real life came rushing back. The long hours, the high-profile meetings, the endless solitude. No wife, no children, nothing. But then why did the other life feel so real? If you're enjoying the story so far and want to support our new channel, please consider subscribing, liking and sharing this video. Your encouragement means a lot to us as we bring you more mysterious and thrilling tales. Now, to continue with the story. As the days passed, Aditya found himself withdrawn, missing the life he thought he had, the life with Priyal, Arav, and Anya. One afternoon, while the nurse adjusted his IV, she said softly, "You don't smile much now. You used to, even in the coma. Once, I even heard you chuckle." Her words lingered in his mind. How could he have smiled while unconscious? Days at the hospital blurred together for Aditya, a stark contrast to the vibrant life he had once known. His days were now filled with quiet monotony, physiotherapy, idle walks through sterile corridors, and silent meals in the hospital cafeteria. The laughter of his children, the warmth of his wife, and the joy of painting had all been replaced by the cold indifference of medical charts and machines. He often found himself staring out the window, wondering if that other life had just been a dream. One afternoon, while walking through the hospital corridor, something caught his eye. An old man, slumped in a wheelchair, was being pushed by a nurse. The sight sent a chill down Aditya's spine. He recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Diwan, the cheerful client from his studio, one so full of life and stories about his large family. Aditya stopped the nurse. "Who is that man?" he asked, his voice tight with disbelief. The nurse glanced at the old man and sighed heavily. "That's Mr. Sinha. He used to have a big family. But one by one they stopped visiting him. At first his children and grandkids came often, but over time they all moved on with their lives. Now they just pay the hospital bills from time to time. No one comes to see him anymore." She frowned, shaking her head disapprovingly. "It's a shame with this new generation. All the money in the world, but no time for their elders. He had a stroke few months back and has been unresponsive since." Aditya's skin prickled with unease. The lively Mr. Diwan he had known, the man who spoke endlessly about his family's love and devotion, was now a forgotten patient in a hospital ward. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? Intrigued and unsettled, Aditya couldn't shake the feeling that his clients were somehow tied to the strange reality he found himself in. He began wandering the hospital corridors daily, peeking into rooms searching for familiar faces, but for days he found nothing. Just patients still and silent, their lives slipping away in the cold sterility of the hospital. Then, one afternoon as he rounded a quiet corner of the ward, he froze. Lying in one of the rooms was a face he knew too well. Ria, the vibrant, confident woman he had painted not long ago, was now barely recognizable. Her sleek, meticulously kept hair was now tangled and dull, her lively eyes shut, her face pale and drawn, her body thin and motionless under the sheets. A nurse passing by noticed Aditya staring. "She's been like this for months," the nurse whispered softly. "She suffered from chronic depression for years. One day, she just gave up, stopped eating, stopped responding. Her body eventually shut down, and now she's in a vegetative state." As he sat beside her, the weight of her decline hit him. The woman who had radiated life was now a hollow shell, her shallow breaths the only sign she was still holding on. Aditya's mind raced. The more he thought about it, the more it felt like these people, Mr. Diwan, now Ria, were reflections of something deeper. The life they had presented in his studio, full of happiness and fulfillment, was in stark contrast to their current realities. What had he really been painting? Had he captured their dreams, their desires, or something they had lost long ago? Aditya's hope swelled with each passing day. After recognizing Mr. Kapoor and Ria, he began searching the hospital more intensely, wandering through corridors and peeking into rooms. On two occasions, he was struck by the familiar faces of other patients, people who had been his clients, yet their real lives were starkly different. One man, whom Aditya remembered as a joyful traveler with endless tales of adventures, now lay motionless in his bed. In reality, he was a stockbroker, someone who had barely stepped outside a city due to the demands of his career. His life had been consumed by work, with little time for anything else. After a tragic accident, his once bustling world had come to a halt, leaving him forgotten by the very family he had worked so hard to support. Another woman, always cheerful and talkative during her sessions, now sat in a wheelchair, staring blankly into space. With every new discovery, Aditya's heart raced. If they were all here, surely Priyal was too. Desperation gnawed at him as he searched frantically, checking every room. But one door remained elusive, the one where an old woman was constantly present, preventing him from entering. Each time he passed by, he would glimpse the elderly lady sitting quietly inside, making it impossible for him to snoop. As the day of his discharge loomed closer, anxiety consumed him. He had to find Priyal before leaving. His hope was slowly giving way to despair, and that evening, while sneaking through the dimly lit corridors, he was caught. "You shouldn't be disturbing other patients, Mr. Aditya," the nurse scolded, her voice sharp but tired. Disheartened, Aditya returned to his room, the realization sinking in that his search had failed. Tomorrow, he would be discharged, and the chance to see Priyal again would be lost. That night, sadness wrapped itself around him, suffocating the small flicker of hope that had kept him going. But just before dawn, as he lay in bed, something caught his attention, a familiar sound drifting through the hallway. A lullaby, the same one Priyal used to sing to their children. His heart pounded in his chest as he followed the sound to the room he had never been able to enter. Inside, an elderly woman sat by the bed of a young woman in a vegetative state, softly singing the lullaby. Aditya stepped closer, and his breath caught in his throat. It was Priyal. He approached the elderly woman, trembling. Who is she?" he asked, his voice shaking. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with sorrow. "She's my granddaughter. She's been here for over a year now. She slipped and had a terrible accident, brain injury. She was 7 months pregnant with twins. She lost the babies and her husband. Well, he stopped visiting after a while." Aditya felt the ground fall away beneath him. She was completely unresponsive for months. The old woman continued. "But on June 8th last year, she smiled for the first time. It was a miracle." Her voice cracked. "But for the last 15 days, she hasn't smiled again." Aditya's heart stopped. June 8th, the day he had been brought to the hospital. The timeline was too precise to ignore. He asked the woman's permission to hold Priyal's hand. And when he did, Priyal's lips curved into a faint smile. Tears welled in his eyes as he sat with her, holding her hand, knowing he had to let go. That night in his hospital room, Aditya wept. He had never prayed before, but now, with his heart breaking, he asked God for one thing, to let him be with Priyal again, with their children, in that other life. He didn't care if it wasn't real. It was where he belonged. The next morning, the nurse found Aditya unresponsive. He had suffered a stroke during the night, slipping back into a coma. Aditya opened his eyes to the sound of Arav and Anya laughing outside. The valley stretched out before him, peaceful and bright. Priyal lay beside him, smiling as she handed him the box with the red pills. "Good morning, Rohan," she whispered. Aditya, no. Rohan smiled, the ache in his heart gone. The other life faded into a distant memory. Here, there was only love, only warmth. Maybe God had heard his prayer, or maybe this was something else, a world between worlds. Perhaps they were all souls redeemed, leaving out a new reality, a purgatory of sorts. But Rohan didn't care. This life was his heaven. And as he looked out at his children running free, he wondered if it even mattered which world was real anymore. This is an original work of fiction created by Echoing Tales, a brand new channel blending suspense and mystery. Join us as we unravel a story shrouded in eerie echoes and spine-chilling twists every week. As we are just starting out, we need your support. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and hit the bell icon to help us keep creating more captivating stories. Until we meet again in the next tale, stay vigilant, and before you sleep tonight, remember to take one last look into the darkness.